Maximum economic pressure. The Trump administration reimposes sanctions on Iran. Attack in Venezuela. We have the latest on what officials are calling an assassination attempt on President Nicolas Maduro. Praise for a pope. The Holy Father uses his Sunday Angelus address to honor Blessed Paul VI. We are in Rome. And faith on display. A look inside an Ohio museum honoring Catholic saints. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 6th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump says the U.S. is taking the next step on Iran. He is reimposing tough sanction on the country's regime, 3 months after pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the U.S. sanctions on Iran will be rigorously enforced and will remain in place until the Iranian government radically changes course. Pompeo says this is not a move against the Iranian people. The U.S. supports Iranians who are demanding change. Rallies in cities across Iran continue. Protesters chanting, "Death to the dictator," a reference to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Sohrab Amari, an American journalist who was born in Iran, says it's been decades since the country has seen such widespread protests.
It definitely entails a lot of working class people who are supposed to be the Iranian regime's base. They're the ones who are now coming out, and their anger is directed in a very clear way at the regime's policies.
Amari notes a lack of religious liberty as one of many problems that are coming to the surface. Secretary Pompeo says the crackdown on protests is worrying. We are deeply concerned about reports of Iranian regime's violence against unarmed citizens. U.S. supports Iranians' people's right to protest against the regime's corruption and oppression without fear of reprisal. We call on the regime in Iran to respect its people's human rights. The Trump administration says Iran's already declining economy is about to get hit hard again from U.S. sanctions. Starting at 12:01 a.m. Tuesday, financial penalties removed under President Obama as part of the 2015 nuclear agreement snap back into place. Those sanctions will limit their ability to buy or acquire U.S. dollars, stop trade of aluminum and steel, and impose tariffs on their automotive industry. Amari hopes the sanctions will pressure the regime to change its behavior.
Whether that's its regional aggression, meaning its terrorist activities, its support for every terrorist group from Lebanon down to the Arabian Peninsula, or whether that's its human rights record at home. So on all these things, we have problems with the Iranian regime, and it's clear that the path of negotiations didn't yield better Iranian behavior, it worsened their behavior.
Not everyone agrees with the Trump administration's decision. The foreign ministers of France, Germany, the UK, and the European Union all say the Iran nuclear deal is working to limit and monitor Iran's nuclear program. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani is striking a hard line, demanding America compensate Iran for decades of intervening in their affairs. Lauren?
Wyatt, these sanctions that are happening now, is that it? Will there be more?
Well, Lauren, come November 4th, the administration plans to reimpose more sanctions that were actually lifted under the Obama administration. Those hit Iran's oil and energy sectors, as well as companies that work with or work through the central bank of Iran, as well as other financial institutions in the country. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. President Trump's economic chief says China better take President Trump seriously. Larry Kudlow tells us he is defending the escalating trade war between the two countries, and he's placing the blame squarely on China's shoulders.
We didn't start this. They're the ones who are not playing by the rules. They're the ones who are stealing technology and intellectual property. They're the ones who have unfair trading barriers.
China has threatened to impose tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. imports in retaliation for American tariffs. The dean of the business school at the Catholic University of America says both sides need to consider how their decisions affect the common good.
We're not the owners of the wealth that we create. We're the stewards of the wealth that we create. And this is a very important message because it says it's not all mine. You know, I can't just be greedy and just say this is all mine. I really have to look out for my neighbor.
Bowman says if Chinese workers start losing their jobs, the country is going to have an extraordinary social problem. And Kudlow says while trade talks have stalled, the two countries are continuing to communicate again. President Trump appears to have changed his story about a 2016 meeting at Trump Tower. It's pivotal to the Russia investigation. He now admits his son, Don Jr., met with a Kremlin-connected lawyer to get information about political rival Hillary Clinton. That is a different explanation than President Trump gave 13 months ago, when a statement dictated by the president said the meeting with Don Jr. was primarily to discuss a program about the adoption of Russian children. Ohio's 12th congressional district is in the national spotlight. Tomorrow, the state holds a special election to fill the seat of retired Representative Pat Tiberi. President Trump is backing the Republican candidate.
Troy Balderson, he is the guy. He is the guy that's going to do things.
Republican Troy Balderson describes himself as 100% pro-life. He pledges to vote to ban late-term abortions and to defund Planned Parenthood if elected. The Democratic candidate is Danny O'Connor, a Catholic. O'Connor supports same-sex marriage and is endorsed by NARAL Pro-Choice America. A win for the Democrat would signal trouble for Republicans this midterm season as they seek to maintain control of the House. Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro says he knows why he survived Saturday's apparent assassination attempt.
Y a mí me protege Dios.
Maduro told the country in an address God protects him. Drones loaded with explosives detonated near the president during a parade. Officials in the socialist government blame suspects in the U.S. and Colombia. Opposition leaders worry Maduro is going to use this attack to further suppress his critics. An economic and humanitarian crisis has gripped the country, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee. Catholic bishops in Nicaragua have canceled events leading up to World Youth Day 2019. They say their country is not safe enough for pilgrims. The Catholic festival is held every 2 years and is taking place in Panama this January. Celebrations are held all over the world to gear up for the event. Both Brazil and Argentina are considering abortion legislation. Currently, abortion in those countries is legal only in the case of rape or if the mother's life is in danger. The Supreme Court in Brazil is holding the first of 2 hearings on abortion. Supporters and opponents are testifying in front of the justices about whether to legalize abortion during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Punishment is up to 3 years in prison, and there is no timetable for when that court might make a decision. Brazil is home to the world's largest population of Catholics. And Argentina's Senate will vote Wednesday on whether to legalize abortion up to 14 weeks. Earlier this year, the bill narrowly passed the country's lower governing body. Over the weekend, thousands of pro-lifers rallied in Buenos Aires in support of the unborn. If it passes, Argentina's president said he will sign it into law. A report from Reuters says that bill is losing steam because a key senator has changed her mind and will vote to protect life. Argentina would become the 3rd country in Latin America to broadly legalize abortion after Uruguay and Cuba. And in Chile, a lawmaker is pushing a bill that would allow abortion up to 14 weeks, but the country's president has promised to oppose efforts to expand abortion. It currently is legal in the case of rape or if the mother's life is in danger. Pope Francis expresses great sadness over the loss of life and destruction caused by Indonesia's earthquakes. He offers heartfelt solidarity and encouragement to rescuers. Sunday's quakes killed at least 98 people. Pope Francis recalls the 40th anniversary of the death of Pope Paul VI.
Il Beato Papa Paolo VI stava vivendo le sue ultime ore su.
During the Angelus on Sunday, Pope Francis called Blessed Paul the Pope of modern times. The Holy Father says he is looking forward to his canonization, which is coming up in October. He died August 6th in 1978 at the age of 81. EWTN Rome Bureau Chief Alan Holdren joins us from Rome. Alan, why does the Pope refer to Paul VI as the Pope of modern times?
Well, Vatican News said today that he's often referred to as the Pope of modernity, as he oversaw transitions in liturgy, seminary formation, theological study, and many other areas of church life. Blessed Paul VI reigned, Lauren, over the Second Vatican Council, the very end of it, and ushered the church into a new era in the 1960s and 70s. It was a time of great transition in the church and in society, and many today still call his teachings prophetic. Documents like Evangelii Nuntiandi on evangelization and also Humanae Vitae on the regulation of birth have been cited regularly by his successors, including St. John Paul II. They continue to be important points of reference also for Pope Francis.
Tell us about Pope Paul VI's final days.
He was in Castle Gandolfo in 1978 during the summer period. He was staying at the residence there, and it was just a normal week. He celebrated the general audience on Wednesday. He met with the Italian president Friday. He worked late into the evening, but on Saturday, really nothing was heard from him. And on Sunday, he was supposed to preside over the Angelus prayer, just like the popes do today at noon. But he didn't appear for that occasion, and the Vatican released a statement that he was suffering from severe arthrosis, those achy joints. Mass was celebrated for him that day, and then at 9:40 p.m., after he had received the anointing of the sick, he died in his bed, reciting the Our Father.
You know, 1978, that led to other deaths. It was called the Year of Three Popes, and it began with his. What happened after that?
That's right. So the death of Pope Paul VI set in action the election of his successor, which was Albino Luciani. He was of Venice, Italy, and he took the name John Paul I. After just 33 days, he died as well, which led to another election of a pope in a conclave, and that was Karol Wojtyła of Krakow, Poland, who took the name John Paul II.
And now he's a saint, right?
II.
That's right. Tell us about the Vatican commemorating Blessed Pope Paul VI's anniversary of his death.
This morning, just before noon, Pope Francis visited the tomb of Paul VI. He's done that in successive years. This morning it was absolutely private. He spent the time there just 10 minutes in silent prayer, absolutely alone. L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican newspaper, also came out with a two-page spread over the weekend in which they laid out a remembrance of him, including a description of his final moments and also a previously unpublished speech from him. So Blessed Pope Paul VI will be canonized by Pope Francis on October the 14th, and that will mark the remembrance of the Church and the recognition that he too is in heaven.
Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly Rome Bureau Chief, filled with facts for us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, a look at the diverse field of candidates in the upcoming midterm elections. And a museum in Ohio honors the saints. The midterm elections are less than 3 months away. 5 states are heading to the polls tomorrow, including Ohio for a special House general election and primaries in Kansas, Michigan, Missouri, and Washington. Joining me now is Genevieve Woods, Senior Communications Advisor at the Heritage Foundation and Senior Contributor for the Daily Signal. Genevieve, welcome back to the program.
Happy Election Eve.
Yes. We have been analyzing some of the overall trends of the midterms and the primaries. You worked for the RNC in your career. We have reported that a record number of women are running, and they seem to be using that fact to distinguish themselves as candidates. Let's look at one of the ads, a Democrat running for Congress in Texas, a veteran and a mom whose ad highlights the doors she's opened and the ones that have been slammed in her face. Is this a smart political strategy for women?
Well, I think it depends on the district. I mean, at the end of the day, it should be about what does a candidate stand for, not are you a man or a woman or what color are you. But I think in some districts, especially left-leaning districts that really don't like President Trump and want to send a message, I think this may generate some of that base there that you might not have gotten otherwise.
According to the New York Times this weekend, more than 400, quote, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender candidates are running for office this year. And the paper cites, quote, groups that track such data, so I don't have the proof there. Have you seen evidence of what they are calling this rainbow wave? And are these candidates resounding, or are they resonating with voters?
Well, you know, one such candidate actually won in Virginia this last election cycle, and actually won a district that had been held by a very conservative Republican, I should say at the state house level. But the point being, even in a conservative area, they were able to pick it up. Look, I think a lot of this has to do with which base turns out, whether we're talking about special elections tomorrow or what happens in November. And when you think of the resist base, if you will, it's made up of many of the people you've talked about.
So what should people be looking for in their candidates if it's not race, if it's not gender?
Yeah. Well, I would be looking at, is my life better or worse today than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, looking at what's impacting my family and me personally. And I think Republicans, if they're wise, would not just be talking about, if you vote for Democrats, you're going to get Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. I get that can be a turnout point, but they ought to be pointing to like their agenda. And one thing they've done, tax reform, for example, is one of the reasons you've seen the economy do as well as it has. If Democrats take the House, certainly they take the House and Senate, one of their first things to do is going to be trying to erase tax reform. And I brought Lauren something. If people want to know, what did I get out of this? You can go to taxesandjobs.com, click on your state, click on your congressional district, and it will tell you exactly what the average voter or average resident there is getting in terms of a tax
Is that from the Heritage
So
Foundation?
this is from the Heritage Foundation, and I happen to pull the one that's in Ohio's Congressional District 12.
Wonder why.
Which is tomorrow. And the average citizen there, their tax cut for 2018 was over $1,400, just over $1,400. If you were to look at take-home pay over the next 10 years, it would be an additional $24,000 just with the tax cut package we have now. If I'm a voter, I look at that, not what color somebody's skin is or what their race, or what gender they are. What's happening to me jobs-wise? What's happening in my community in terms of how policy's affecting me?
And are you seeing at the Heritage Foundation that people are doing that?
Well, when you're looking at the real numbers and people go, wait, that's me, that's my area, that's what's not just me, but my neighbors as well. Yes, it does have an impact, but people have to be reminded and told. And I think it's important, if people out there are concerned about these things, go to taxesandjobs.com. You can look at what's happening in your state, what's happening in your district, other places, because that's the reality.
All right, Genevieve Wood, Senior Communications Advisor at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for being here. Up next, it's a dire situation for children and orphans in Sierra Leone. How the church is helping. And we take you inside an unusual museum that will feed your faith. U.S. bishops are praising legislative efforts to secure family leave policies. A new Senate bill would allow parents to draw 2 months of Social Security benefits while caring for their newborn. A spokesman for the bishop says, quote, new parents ought to be supported in raising the next generation. According to a new report, the overall global Catholic population has experienced its greatest increase in Africa. The Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, or CARA, shows the Catholic population in Africa rose 18% between the years 2011 and 2016. The number of priests in Africa increased 16% during that same time period. Joining me now is Father Peter Conte, Executive Director of Caritas Freetown in Sierra Leone and the President of the Priest Association there. Father, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here.
You heard the statistics about Africa and the priests. What is it like in Sierra Leone?
It's amazing. Through the grace of God, vocation is increasing. In Sierra Leone, it is very unique because 60% of our populations are Muslims. And it is astonishing to know that about 40% of our priests are Muslim guys who went to our Catholic schools and are now priests. So it's amazing
that
conversion is taking place, and there's interreligious tolerance, and then the vocation is just booming. Especially after our war, after the Ebola, the church was very active in playing pragmatic role in expressing love to people.
Let's talk about that. In 2014, Ebola left, 12,000 children orphaned. That's what I have here, 12,000. How did Caritas step in to help?
Well, that has been our big strength in responding to the situation of the orphans, because we had an experience. After the war, we had a lot of orphans to deal with. So when Ebola came, we already had all the strategies in place. We already have interim centers. And so it was easy for us, even though we were overwhelmed because the numbers came out. And they were difficult to find placement for because people were afraid that the disease would transmit. So it was a special case. But because we had an experience of war orphans, it was easy to translate that to Ebola orphans and help them get foster parents and families in place.
We don't hear anything about Ebola now.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because, as we see recently in Congo, it's emerging again. So we are constantly on our alert, constantly creating awareness because the pattern of Ebola, it seems to resurface again. And so our campaign continues as usual.
Your healthcare services at what hospital is it? Christ the King Hospital?
Yeah.
Tell us about those and how they help women and children and how Caritas, the Catholic relief organization internationally, helps.
Positive, if we want to say positive in a crisis, it was during Ebola that we realized that generally our healthcare needs a lot of support and needs a lot of augmenting. Christ the King Hospital is located where was a former displaced and refugee camp, so it's among the poorest of the poor. And because of the high infant mortality, we decided we were going to dedicate this hospital to children because we see children are suffering so much. And, Sierra Leone is one of those in the bottom in the infant mortality rate. So we placed this hospital as a unique one to help care and love and see that. And the data shows now that there has been at least a boost in the people that are dying after giving birth.
Thank you so much for coming on the program. It's important for our viewers to hear about the good work that's happening in other countries. Father, thank you so much. Father Peter Conte, Executive Director of Caritas Freetown in Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Finally tonight, a former Catholic church outside of Cleveland might still be able to help the faithful. News Nightly contributor Colm Flynn shows us how.
It's funny, every time I walk into the space, I think to myself, is this what I want to continue to do? And every time I come in here, I know that I did the right thing, being part of people's faith and their prayer and their lives.
This is the Museum of Divine Statues in Cleveland, Ohio, founded by Lou McClung. It's a collection of over 100 beautifully preserved and restored Catholic statues from all over Cleveland and beyond.
When did you first become interested in religious statues?
Well, I think for me, growing up Catholic in an Italian household, that statues and that type of thing were really big. But all types of art have always interested me. And I was actually going to begin to collect art for myself. And so when I first acquired some of the pieces, they were in such horrible condition. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I could fix them. And then that just started the whole thing from there.
Lou has become a master at bringing life back to these old statues, each one having been fully restored to how they originally should have looked.
A lot of the art that we actually do take in is severely damaged. So what happens with art like that is churches will not display it, and sometimes they often destroy them and sometimes bury them, and so they are lost forever. So my job as a restoration artist is not to reinvent the wheel and come up with crazy colors that I think the statue should be. My job is to research what was and make it look exactly the same.
The museum attracts people from near and far, and for many, it is the first time they have an opportunity to get up close to art like this.
It's amazing. I mean, when you see these statues in the churches, you're seeing them from far away. So to see them up close and see the craftsmanship, it's amazing.
The history behind some of the statues is very amazing too, where they came from, how old they are.
Working on these statues here, what has it taught you about your own faith in the Catholic Church?
The Catholic faith is really, really rich in art. And people think, well, it's beautiful and extravagant, but what people need to realize too is it all has a purpose. The art was meant to educate. There were people coming in from different countries that didn't speak the language. Back in the day, you had to be wealthy to have books. So when you look around at stained glass windows, statues, and all kinds of different art that we have here in the museum, there's actually a really practical reason for it too, as well as spiritual.
At the Museum of Divine Statues in Cleveland, Ohio, Colm Flynn for EWTN News Nightly.
What a beautiful piece. Thank you, Colin Flynn, for that story. To watch more, visit our EWTN News Nightly Facebook page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless.